I want to tell you a story. As I have been scrolling through my TikTok and Instagram feed over the last few months, watching the death and destruction happening thousands of miles away, there was a video that really stuck with me. It was of a woman who rushed into her home that could collapse at any moment. The area had been recently bombed by Israeli forces and the house was unstable, but still, she took the risk to rescue some pillowcases. The pillowcases were embellished with delicate geometric designs, tatris, traditional embroidery that had been hand-sewn by her grandmother. It was such a small moment, but I totally understood it. In anthropology, we talk a lot about material culture, about the symbolic importance we as humans can place on objects, the ritualistic creation of an object as one's hands methodically move back and forth, imbuing that object with a sort of magic. When I hold something that has been made by hand, it has a weight to it that machine-made objects don't. That weight, it's almost as if I'm holding the weight of the human effort put into it. But if I stop trying to intellectualize my emotions for once, I can also understand it as a person who has a mom who taught her how to do needlework. I have memories of watching my mother's hands diligently moving thread as she recounted stories about her mother or our other relatives who passed before my time, weaving story and thread together as we sat in the soft warmth of an early summer sun. Embroidery is a bit of a catch-all term for any kind of technique that uses a needle and thread to put designs in fabric. It's one of the oldest crafts in the world. While it is beautiful, its purpose is not purely aesthetic. It can be used as a type of record-keeping, cultural practice, and community building. The kind of embroidery that is native to Palestinian culture is called tatris. It's traditionally taught orally from mother to daughter, and many villages have their own particular pattern, but they tend to follow geometric designs. Tatris is traditionally made with a cross stitch, like the one I'm making on screen. To make a cross stitch, you stitch one diagonal line going in one direction, and then go over it with the diagonal facing the opposite direction to make a cross or X stitch. While it may look like a bunch of rows of X's close up, when I pull away, you can see those X's combine to make a full picture. Think of cross-stitching as the grandma of pixel art. I really like cross-stitch. There's something about it that makes me feel connected to others. As I pull my needle across my canvas, I can feel an invisible thread tying me to other people who practice the same craft. People I've never met and will never meet, to people who lived hundreds or thousands of years before me, and whoever comes after me. We may not speak the same language, or practice the same religion, or agree on the best flavor of ice cream, but in a way, we can understand each other. We can reach back through centuries of our mothers and grandmothers and follow their hands, thread our needles, and pull the strings through cloth as they once did. On Mother's Day, I was lucky enough to join in a service for Palestinian mothers on the Providence pedestrian bridge. I stood and listened as different women came forward to speak. Some of them had grown up in the US or immigrated with families still abroad. Others had fled the violence themselves. Many of those brave women had lost so much, it's hard to even quantify. Their grief and rage spilled out of them like sand in an hourglass. One thing that a speaker said really stuck with me. She said that it was the responsibility of each person there to remind people that Palestinians are human. She challenged us to write poetry, sing songs, draw illustrations, to use any piece of art we could make, and to keep making it until the whole world could see the humanity of Palestine. I would like to say that Palestine is a country and an issue that I've always cared about and watched closely. Israel attacking Palestine is unfortunately nothing new. They've been dealing with some version of what is happening since 1945. But if I'm being honest, I, like many Americans, turned a blind eye to the issue. Before October of last year, I could tell you that the US supported Israel and that there was some sort of animosity between Israel and Palestine. I'd heard the words two-state solution and apartheid state thrown around, but I'm not sure I actually knew what any of that meant. If I'm being honest, I bought into the typical American narrative, that this was a geopolitical issue, too complicated for a simpleton like me to understand. And golly gee, I'd love to have an opinion on that, but I'm not really up to date with the history of this region. I'd also heard that most criticisms of Israel were anti-Semitic, or at least came from anti-Semitic people. And as someone who tries to be a good person, but is not Jewish, and hasn't interacted much with Jewish culture, teacher, I thought, well, I don't want to be anti-Semitic, and if criticizing Israel makes me anti-Semitic, I probably shouldn't say anything about this issue. But it doesn't take a genius to watch what is happening every day in Gaza and understand that we're witnessing a genocide. I'm well aware that by even calling it a genocide and not a war or a conflict, it's pretty obvious where my sympathies lie. But words have meaning, and to call what is happening anything else feels like sugarcoating it at best and actively lying at worst. In 1996, Gregory Stanton, a professor of human rights and genocide studies, presented a paper titled The 8 Stages of Genocide. This paper details the steps that genocides tend to follow and countermeasures that global leaders can take to ensure they don't happen. To be clear, this is not a recipe or a step-by-step guide. A genocide can follow some or all of these steps, and some of the steps can happen simultaneously or out of order. Stanton and his research team studied previous events such as the Holocaust and the Armenian genocide to discover patterns that the massacres follow. The point of the paper isn't to have an all-encompassing definition, but rather to signal to global leadership, hey, if more than one of these starts to happen, that country might be headed down a really dark place and you might want to stop it before that happens. With that clarification out of the way, what are the 10 steps? The first 2 start innocently enough: categorization and symbolization. These 2 aren't necessarily bad. Categorization simply means defining different groups and who is a member of these groups. You can define these groups in different ways, such as saying Israelis are Jewish, Palestinians are Muslim, Israelis speak Hebrew, Palestinians speak Arabic. This is, of course, ignoring people who don't neatly fit into one of these boxes, like Christian Palestinians or Arabic-speaking Israelis. But categorization exists to create a simplistic idea of who is an in member and who is an out member of a group, not to reflect nuance or reality. That being said, the trouble comes when those categories and symbols are used for step 3, discrimination. When the dominant group begins to deny the civil rights or even the citizenship of the other group and uses the state to institutionalize lesser treatment. In a 2022 Amnesty International article, the humanitarian group accused Israel of institutional discrimination and crimes against humanity. Said Amnesty International Secretary General, whether they live in Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the rest of the West Bank, or Israel itself, Palestinians are treated as an inferior racial group and systematically deprived of their rights. The report details how Israel uses its power to enact unequal treatment, including unequal treatment under the law, denying basic necessities like water and electricity or emergency supplies like COVID-19 vaccine. Stage 4 is dehumanization. This process has members of a marginalized group being thought of as less than human. You might have the marginalized group referred to as insects, rats, beasts, or any other kind of inhuman pest. Once the state conceptualizes a group of humans as a pest, they can justify any action taken against those humans as if they were simply getting rid of an anthill or a rat nest. Step 5 is organization. The group in power creates special army units or militia who are trained and armed. These special units are typically designed for the purpose of carrying out a genocide. The IDF, euphemistically called the Israel Defense Force, is the military inside of Israel. Sadly, I cannot list every crime that they've been accused of because they're countless at this point, spanning decades all the way back to their creation. But overall, they show a careless disregard for the lives of the people of Palestine and act with total impunity, knowing that they'll almost certainly not face any punishment for their actions and may even be rewarded for it. To add to this point, U.S. police forces and military often train with the IDF or send IDF soldiers to the U.S. to be trained. Step 6, polarization. Extremists drive the 2 groups apart, leaders are arrested and murdered, laws become more extreme. One of the recent examples of this was the children and grandchildren of Ismail Haniyeh being directly targeted by Israeli forces. They were murdered while visiting relatives during Eid, which is supposed to be one of the holiest holidays in the Muslim faith. Step 7, preparation. Mass killing has been planned. Victims are identified and separated from the general public due to their ethnic or religious identity. This has sadly been happening for years in the different parts of Palestine. Israel has closed border crossings and often sets up checkpoints between different parts of cities or neighborhoods. At these checkpoints, Palestinians must stand in line, sometimes for hours, to be searched, harassed, and sometimes shot on the spot. Humanitarian groups such as the Human Rights Watch have described the setting as open-air prisons. Add to this the fact that Israel has repeatedly blocked any aid, any sources of water, any sources of oil that could power hospitals, and it's a mass killing in everything but name. Step 8, persecution. Marginalized groups are forced off their land, placed into ghettos or concentration camps. If you look at a map of what is considered Israel and what is considered Palestine, you can see this happening for yourself. Many Palestinians have been forced out, chased from their homes, and displaced by Israelis or Jewish Americans. One of the major symbols of the Palestine diaspora is a key. Many of those who fled keep copies of the houses that they were forced to leave behind in hope that they may someday return. Israeli whistleblowers have also recently revealed very horrifying information about what exactly is being done to those captured inside the Israel war machine. Many describe these as concentration camps. Step 9, extermination. The perpetrators do not believe their victims are human, and they have come to believe that it is their duty to exterminate the whole of the marginalized group. Again, the examples of this are too much to count. I've been working on this script for months, and every time I try to think of something awful, but here, to prove my point, Israel just creates something even more awful to do to these people. It's not even something I really need to prove if you've been paying any attention to what has been happening, and it's not something that they're hiding at this point. To pick one example of this feels like underselling what is happening. Videos of IDF soldiers cheering as they bomb people's homes, taking pictures of murdered women's lingerie as trophies, US politicians signing messages on bombs that will murder innocents. These are not closely guarded secrets hidden in government file cabinets. It's all happening right in front of us. Step 10, denial. The perpetrators deny that they have committed any crime. What is happening in Palestine is a genocide. There is no other word for it, and trying to find different words for it just softens the blow of the most horrendous actions I can think of. This is not new either. Many of the examples I'm using are contemporary, but I could just as easily use examples from 10, 20, 30 years ago. This has been happening since the beginning of the Nakba, the Arabic term for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, which began in 1946. I will not absolve myself of my ignorance. I, like many Westerners, turned a blind eye for too many years. But as I have begun to learn what is happening, I can't look away. It cuts your heart out. And it makes the American political machine that I live in, that finds every excuse to justify the inexcusable, that much more disgusting. I know it can often feel like we are powerless. We cannot grow apathetic. Nothing can change unless we try to change it. Most directly, I would say to check out Operation Olive Branch or the Palestinian Children Fund. These are organizations that are providing direct financial aid to those in need. You can also donate to organizations that are trying their hardest to help right now, like Doctors Without Borders. There is also an organization trying to get e-cards to Palestinians. I will provide a list of organizations down below that you can donate to if you are able to. I understand that donation is not always possible, budgets are tight, but if you have even $1 or $2 to spend, it could impact someone's life. I would also recommend trying to get involved with local groups that are doing protests if you have any in your area. Now more than ever, it's important that we don't stop fighting this. A lot of politics assume that people will grow tired and people will stop caring about an issue, and we cannot let that be the case. If nothing else, you can help by learning more about Palestine. The ultimate goal of a genocide is to destroy a people and those people's culture. When you learn about the history of Palestine, or listen to their music and art, or make a Palestinian recipe for dinner, in some small way, you're keeping a tiny flame of that culture alive. You're saying that the world won't forget them. As I mentioned before, the piece that I'm embroidering in this video is a Tatriz pattern. It's called Poppies and Dragonflies. I purchased this from an Etsy shop run by a Palestinian American, and I'll put the name of that on the screen, but also in the description. The seller was very nice, and the kit came with clear instructions. If you've never tried embroidery but want to, I highly recommend this kit and the others in her shop. Please keep Palestine in your conversations and your social media feed. It can be easy for news stories to blow up like this and get a lot of traction, only for them to die down as soon as the next horrendous thing occurs. It can be really easy to feel useless, that all your efforts are wasted, and in the grand scheme of things, we really can't affect much. I often feel like that when trying to do activism. But when I work on my needlepoint, I'm reminded that effort takes time. Each stitch that I put into this work doesn't seem like much. Another line, another X, another piece of thread. But as I put more time into it and zoom out, the picture finally starts to form. I hope that you can find something to put your effort into. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. I hope that you'll help us get there.